In the distant galaxy of Yareth, a planet called Zora flourished, its royal court as grand as it was ancient. The Zoran people were known for their advanced technology, wisdom, and beauty, but none more so than their princess. Her name was Xyla, and she was admired by all who laid eyes on her. Her long silver hair flowed like moonlight across the night sky, and her violet eyes seemed to see into the very soul of those who dared look into them. Xyla was everything one could dream of in a leader, intelligent, strong, and fiercely independent. Her presence alone commanded attention, and her wisdom made her the rightful heir to the Zoran throne. But there was something about her that kept people at a distance, something that no one could understand. Despite being surrounded by admirers, Xyla's heart remained cold, untouched by any of them. The Zoran males, with their charm and power, could never win her affections, and no matter how hard they tried, they all failed. It was as if something inside of her kept them all at arm's length. Her court was filled with the whispers of courtiers and servants who speculated about her personal life. Some said she was cursed, that no Zoran could ever touch her heart. Others believed it was because of the tragic loss of her mother, the late queen, that left her scarred. Whatever the reason, Xyla remained unbothered by the failed suitors and the gossip. To her, the affairs of the heart were unnecessary distractions. She had a kingdom to rule, a people to protect. Xyla spent most of her days in the Grand Palace Library, buried in ancient scrolls and royal treaties. She was preparing for the greatest challenge of her life, a peace treaty that could end the long-standing conflict between Zora and a neighboring planet, Drakros. The war had been raging for decades, and both sides had suffered immense losses. The galaxy was on edge, and the eyes of many watched as Xyla prepared to make her move. Her father, the king, often reminded her that the future of their people rested on her ability to broker peace with Drakros. The princess, however, cared little for the politics of war. She had seen too many of her people die and too much blood spilled to believe that peace could truly last. And yet, she knew it was her duty. She would see it through, no matter how hard it became, but her duty was not the only thing that weighed on her heart. Deep inside, where she kept her emotions hidden, Xyla longed for something she could never have, someone who would truly understand her, someone who could touch her heart in a way that no Zoran could. She often found herself wondering what it would be like to fall in love, to have someone by her side who wasn't trying to gain favor or power. But such thoughts only troubled her. So she buried them in the recesses of her mind and focused on the task at hand. One evening, as the stars twinkled brightly in the night sky, Xyla stood on the palace balcony, looking out over the vast expanse of her kingdom. The golden towers of the palace shone brightly in the moonlight, casting long shadows across the marble streets below. A soft breeze ruffled her hair as she stared into the distance, lost in her thoughts. Suddenly, a voice broke through her solitude. "Princess Xyla, I hope I'm not interrupting." She turned to see a young man standing at the entrance to the balcony. He was dressed in the attire of a diplomat, his uniform a simple but elegant black and silver. His eyes, a warm brown, met hers. With a quiet confidence, and his expression was calm, almost indifferent. "I'm not here to disturb you, Princess," he continued, his voice smooth but sincere. "But I've been asked to speak with you. The Council is waiting for your decision on the peace treaty." Xyla's first instinct was to dismiss him, but something about his presence made her pause. He wasn't like the other courtiers and diplomats who visited her. There was no trace of desperation in his gaze, no hint of awe in his tone. He was not here to beg for her attention or win her favor. He was simply here to do his job. "You are the human diplomat," Xyla said, her voice cool but not unkind. "What is it that you want from me?" The young man smiled faintly. "I've been sent to help facilitate peace between Zora and Drakros. My name is Callan." Xyla studied him, for a moment her violet eyes narrowing slightly. She had heard of humans before, but they were a mystery to her people. They were known for their adaptability and their unassuming nature, but also for their unpredictability. And yet, there was something strangely comforting about this one. He didn't bow before her as others did. He didn't flatter her with empty praise or compliments. Instead, he simply stood there, awaiting her response. "You'll find I'm not like the others," Callan said, as if reading her mind. "I'm not here to play games. I'm here to help, Princess, if you'll allow it." Zyla was taken aback by his bluntness. She wasn't used to people speaking to her this way. Most of the time, she was treated as a queen in waiting, admired from a distance, and revered for her status. But Callan wasn't looking at her as royalty. He wasn't intimidated by her title or her beauty. He seemed for the first time to see her as a person, not just a symbol of power. She found herself intrigued, though she wouldn't admit it aloud. "Very well," she said, her tone still guarded. "We have much to discuss." As they walked back into the palace together, Zyla couldn't help but feel a strange sense of anticipation. She had no idea what this human diplomat would bring into her life, but for the first time in a long time, she felt a flicker of something in her heart. Something she had not allowed herself to feel in years. And perhaps, just perhaps, Callan was the one who might finally touch the heart she had kept hidden for so long. The next morning, Princess Zyla found herself in the royal meeting room, her thoughts swirling around the young human diplomat. She had tried to push the memory of their conversation from her mind, focusing instead on the peace treaty. But Callan's calm demeanor and his quiet confidence lingered in her thoughts. She couldn't shake the feeling that he was different from all the others she had met before. The royal court had gathered to discuss the treaty's final terms. Zyla sat at the head of the table, surrounded by her advisors and the nobles of her kingdom. Her father, King Zorath, stood beside her, his face stern as he addressed the room. The tension was thick, as the peace negotiations had dragged on for months without any sign of resolution. "My daughter," the king said, turning toward Zyla, "you must make your decision today. If we do not sign this treaty with Drakros, our people will continue to suffer. This is our only chance for peace." Zyla nodded slowly, her gaze drifting to the papers before her. The treaty was fair, on the surface, but there were aspects of it that felt wrong. She wasn't sure if her people could trust Drakros. She had always believed that peace was more than just an agreement on paper. It required trust, and trust was something she had little of in her court. "You are right, father," she replied, her voice calm. "But there are still many questions that need to be answered. I do not want to make a decision based on fear or pressure. Our people deserve better than that." Her words hung in the air, and the court fell silent. Zyla could feel the weight of the responsibility on her shoulders. The fate of her kingdom rested on her decision, and she could sense that her advisors were growing impatient. But she couldn't make a choice in haste. Her instincts told her that something was wrong, and she needed more time. At that moment, the doors to the meeting room opened, and in walked Callan. His presence was unexpected, but it brought a strange calm to the room. He was dressed in his simple diplomatic uniform, with a confident yet respectful air about him. He didn't bow or make any grand gestures as he entered. He simply stood and waited for Zyla's acknowledgement. Zyla looked up, her violet eyes meeting his brown gaze. There was something about the way he stood there, not looking at her as royalty, but as a person. It was a stark contrast to how the other diplomats had behaved, always seeking her approval or fawning over her. But not Callan. He was focused, calm, and most importantly, genuine. For a brief moment, Zyla felt something stir inside her, feeling she hadn't experienced in years. "Princess Zyla," Callan said, his voice steady and respectful. "I've come to speak with you about the treaty. I know this decision is not easy, but I believe I can help." Her advisors muttered among themselves, clearly unsettled by his sudden appearance. Zyla raised a hand to silence them, then turned to Callan. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice betraying a hint of curiosity. "I've been working closely with the Drakros diplomats," Callan explained. "I know their true intentions. They want peace, but they are also desperate. They've suffered greatly, and they fear that your people might strike first. The treaty you're being asked to sign is only the first step toward a more lasting peace, but it requires trust. Trust that neither side will betray the other." Zyla felt a tightness in her chest as she listened to Callan's words. The weight of her kingdom's future pressed heavily on her, and now she felt the burden even more deeply. She had always believed in her people's strength, but she couldn't ignore the truth of Callan's words. She had no reason to trust Drakros, but neither did they trust Zora. The war had made them all distrustful and wary. "Trust," Zyla muttered under her breath. "How do you expect me to trust them when they've brought us nothing but conflict?" Callan's eyes softened, and he stepped closer, his gaze focused on her. "Because sometimes, Princess, you have to take a leap of faith. Not all battles are fought with weapons. Some are fought with understanding." Zyla was taken aback. His words were simple, yet they held a depth that made her pause. She had spent so many years hiding behind her title and her walls, thinking that her strength lay in keeping others at a distance. But here was a human, someone with no stake in her kingdom's future, offering her a solution not of power, but of trust. Zyla's thoughts swirled as she considered his words. She had spent her entire life protecting her people, but had she been protecting them from the wrong things? Was it possible that she had been too focused on the wrong kind of strength, the strength that came from control and fear, instead of from trust and mutual respect? "Do you truly believe peace can be achieved?" she asked, her voice quieter now, as though speaking her doubts aloud might make them more real. Callan nodded. "Yes, I do. But it will take more than just signing a treaty. It will take time, effort, and the willingness to listen to one another." Zyla felt a pang in her chest. She had always believed that peace was a dream, something that could never be achieved. But now, with Callan standing before her, something within her began to change. Maybe, just maybe, there was hope for something more. "Thank you, Callan," Zyla said, her voice softer than before. "I will take your words into consideration. Perhaps there is more to this treaty than I realized." Callan bowed his head respectfully. "I only wish to help, Princess. Your people deserve peace." As he left the room, Zyla found herself staring after him, her heart heavy with the weight of the decision that lay ahead. She had always kept her emotions locked away, but now, for the first time in a long time, she felt something stir inside her. It was a feeling she couldn't quite name, but it was there, quiet, yet undeniable. Zyla knew the path ahead would not be easy. There were still many hurdles to overcome, both in the negotiations and in her own heart. But one thing was clear. Callan had opened her eyes to a new way of thinking, one that didn't rely on power or fear. For the first time, Zyla wondered if there could be more to her life than just ruling a kingdom. Could there be room for something else? Something she had never allowed herself to feel before? And in that moment, Zyla realized that she might not be as alone as she had once believed. The days that followed Callan's visit were filled with tension. Zyla found herself caught between the demands of her kingdom and the mysterious human diplomat who had started to change her way of thinking. She spent her time reviewing the peace treaty, meeting with advisors, and preparing for the upcoming diplomatic summit. But no matter how hard she tried to focus on her duties, her mind would wander back to Callan. His words echoed in her mind. "Sometimes peace is achieved through trust, not strength," Zyla had spent her whole life believing that strength and control were the only things that mattered. But now, for the first time, she was questioning that belief. Could peace really be achieved through trust? Was she ready to take that leap of faith? The answer, however, was not something Zyla could resolve on her own. She had been raised to believe that a leader's strength lay in her ability to make difficult decisions. But Callan had opened her eyes to the possibility that strength might not always come from making the hardest choices. It might come from making the right choices. It was during one of these internal struggles that Zyla decided to put Callan to the test. As the preparations for the summit continued, Zyla arranged a private meeting with him. She had decided that she would challenge him, not with words, but with action. If Callan truly believed in the strength of peace and trust, then he would need to prove it, and Zyla would be the one to test him. The royal training grounds were vast, stretching far across the palace grounds. Here, warriors from across the galaxy came to train, honing their skills in combat, both physical and mental. It was a place where Zyla herself often came to clear her mind. She was no stranger to the art of war, having been trained from a young age to defend her people. When Callan arrived, he seemed a little surprised by the setting. He had expected a diplomatic discussion, but instead, he found himself standing in the middle of an arena surrounded by tall walls of stone. The sound of clashing swords echoed in the distance, a reminder of the warrior spirit that Zyla had grown up with. Zyla stood before him, her posture straight and confident. "I've decided to test your beliefs, Callan," she said. "You say that? Peace can be achieved through trust. But I want to see if you have the strength to back up your words." Callan looked at her, his expression serious. "What do you want me to do, princess?" "I want you to face me in combat," she said, her voice firm. "Not as a leader, but as a warrior. I will test your strength, your mind, and your heart. If you are truly capable of peace, you must prove it here." The words stung Callan, but he didn't back down. He had expected many challenges during his time on Zora, but this was different. This wasn't about politics or diplomacy. It was personal. It was a test not just of his abilities, but of his character. "Very well," Callan said, nodding slightly. "I accept your challenge." Zyla motioned for the guards to step back, creating space between them. She unsheathed her blade, a weapon forged from the strongest materials in the galaxy, and held it with ease. Callan, although a skilled fighter in his own right, had never faced a warrior like Zyla. She was a master of her craft, and he knew this would not be an easy fight. The air was thick with tension as they circled each other. Zyla's eyes were fixed on Callan, watching his every movement. She had to admit, there was something about the way he stood there, unwavering and calm, that intrigued her. He was not intimidated by her status, nor by her strength. He was simply focused on the challenge before him. Without warning, Zyla lunged forward, her blade aimed at Callan's chest. Callan sidestepped just in time, his reflexes sharp. He was quick, but not as fast as Zyla. She struck again, this time aiming for his side. Callan blocked her blow with his own weapon, but the force of the strike sent him stumbling back. Zyla watched him closely. He was strong, but not yet strong enough. She could see the hesitation in his movements, the uncertainty in his eyes. This was not just a physical battle. It was a battle of wills. And Zyla knew that if Callan truly wanted to succeed, he would need to overcome his doubts. "Why do you hesitate?" Zyla asked, her voice steady as she watched him. "You have the strength. Callan, you just need to trust yourself." Callan's breath came in shallow gasps, but he nodded. "I'm not afraid of you, princess," he said, raising his weapon again. "I'm just not sure how I'm supposed to fight for peace with a weapon." Zyla's eyes narrowed, and she took a step back. "You think peace is achieved by avoiding conflict? by avoiding strength. You're wrong. True peace requires strength. Strength to protect, strength to stand firm, and strength to trust others. The only way to achieve peace is through power. Understanding and compassion are not enough without the strength to defend them. Callan didn't respond. He simply stepped forward, his movements more assured now. He was learning not just how to fight, but how to understand the very idea of strength that Zyla held so dear. The battle continued, each strike and block drawing them closer to a mutual understanding. Zyla's blows were precise, but Callan was starting to match her, not in speed or power, but in heart. In the end, it was Zyla who stepped back, her sword lowered. She regarded Callan with a mixture of respect and something else, something she couldn't quite place. "You've passed," she said, her voice quiet, but sincere. "You have strength, Callan. But more than that, you have the heart of a warrior. You understand that peace is not just about avoiding conflict. It's about having the strength to protect what you love." Callan nodded, though he was breathing heavily. "I understand now, Princess. It's not about avoiding battles. It's about choosing the right ones to fight." Zyla looked at him, her eyes softening for the first time. "Perhaps, Callan, you were right all along." And in that moment, Zyla knew that she had been wrong about so many things. True strength wasn't just in weapons or power, it was in trust, compassion, and the willingness to fight for what was right. The days following the challenge were strangely quiet. Zyla found herself haunted by her thoughts more than ever before. Callan had passed her test, not only in physical strength but in understanding the true nature of peace. What had started as a simple challenge had become a turning point in Zyla's understanding of both herself and the world around her. She had always prided herself on being strong, independent, and unyielding, but Callan had shown her that real strength came from within, not from power, but from trust and compassion. Zyla could no longer ignore the feelings that had begun to stir within her. Her heart, which had long been locked away, was now open to something she had never expected. She had spent so many years building walls around herself, protecting her heart from the world. But Callan had found a way to breach those walls, not with force, but with kindness and understanding. And in doing so, he had made her realize that perhaps there was more to life than just duty and strength. As the peace talks continued, Zyla couldn't help but notice the way her thoughts constantly drifted back to him. It wasn't just his strength. That intrigued her, but the way he had looked at her, really looked at her, not as a princess, but as a person. No one had ever done that before. Her people, her courtiers, and even her advisors saw her as a symbol of power, but Callan saw her as someone with hopes, dreams, and fears. One evening, after a long day of meetings, Zyla found herself alone in the palace gardens. The moonlight bathed the flower-filled courtyard in a soft glow, casting shadows on the ancient stone walls. The cool breeze brushed against her skin as she walked, lost in thought. She had always found peace here, away from the politics and expectations of the court. The quiet solitude of the garden gave her a chance to think clearly. She had just come to a quiet bench near the fountain when she heard a voice behind her. "Princess Zyla," Callan said, his voice gentle. Zyla turned to find him standing at the edge of the garden, his dark eyes watching her with a mixture of concern and something else, something she couldn't quite place. "You've been avoiding me," he said, taking a step closer. "I've noticed it for the past few days." Zyla's heart skipped a beat. She wasn't sure how to respond. It wasn't that she was intentionally avoiding him, but rather that she didn't know how to face him now. The emotions that Callan had stirred in her were confusing and unfamiliar. She had always believed that emotions were weaknesses, but now, with Callan, she felt as if they were a strength. It was both exhilarating and terrifying at the same time. "I haven't been avoiding you," Zyla said, her voice softer than usual. I've been thinking. Thinking about what? Callan asked, taking another step closer, his tone gentle and patient. Zyla hesitated. She had always been careful with her words, but now, in his presence, she felt a strange sense of urgency. Thinking about everything you've said, about strength, peace, and trust. She paused, her heart racing. About us. Callan's eyes widened slightly, as if he hadn't expected her to admit what he had been wondering for so long. He took a deep breath, and when he spoke, his voice was calm, though it held a hint of emotion. I've been thinking about us too, Princess. I've never met anyone like you before. You are stronger than anyone I've ever known, but you're also more than that. You're kind, intelligent, and you're more than just the princess. You're a person. Zyla felt her chest tighten at his words. No one had ever spoken to her like this before. She had always been the princess, the ruler, the one who had to be strong and distant. But Callan saw her for who she truly was, not for her title, and that made her feel vulnerable in a way she hadn't anticipated. She took a deep breath and finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't know how to be vulnerable, Callan. I've spent my whole life building walls around my heart, afraid to let anyone in. But with you, I feel something I can't explain, something I've never felt before. Callan stepped forward, his expression softening. You don't have to explain anything, Zyla. I'm not asking you to let down all your walls at once. I'm just here for you, whenever you're ready. Zyla looked into his eyes, and for the first time, she saw a glimmer of hope in his gaze. He wasn't asking her to change, to be something she wasn't. He was simply offering his support, his friendship, and maybe, just maybe, his love. I'm scared, she admitted, her voice trembling slightly. Scared of what it means to open up. Scared of what might happen if I let someone in. I've always been taught that emotions are a weakness, that they make you vulnerable. But now I'm not sure. Callan reached out, his hand gently resting on hers. Emotions aren't a weakness, Zyla. They're what make us human. What makes us strong. You've always been strong in your own way, but now you have a chance to be strong in a different way. You don't have to do this alone. Zyla felt the weight of his words, and something inside her began to shift. She had always believed that her strength came from being distant, from remaining untouchable. But now, standing in the moonlight with Callan, she realized that her true strength came from allowing herself to feel, allowing herself to care. For the first time, Zyla let her guard down. She allowed herself to trust him, to open her heart to the possibility of something more. She knew that the road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be challenges, both within herself and in the world around her. But for the first time in her life, Zyla felt ready to face them, ready to embrace the unknown. Thank you, Callan, she said quietly, her eyes meeting his, for helping me see that there's more to life than just strength. Callan smiled gently, his eyes filled with warmth. You're welcome, Zyla. And remember, you're never alone in this. As Zyla looked up at the stars above, she felt a sense of peace settle over her. She had been searching for something her entire life, and now she realized that it was never about finding the perfect solution or the perfect answer. It was about finding someone who could help her discover her true self. And in Callan, she had found that. The days leading up to the summit were tense. Zyla found herself torn between the world of politics and the emotions she had never allowed herself to feel. She was still trying to come to terms with what had happened between her and Callan. For the first time, she was questioning everything she had been taught about strength and power, and she wasn't sure how to proceed. The peace talks with Drakros were reaching their climax, and the fate of her people hung in the balance. Zyla knew the importance of the treaty, but the pressure to succeed weighed heavily on her. She had always been told that a ruler's duty came first, and her personal feelings were irrelevant. But now, with Callan by her side, she was beginning to wonder if there was more to leadership than just making the tough decisions. Late one evening, Zyla was alone in her chambers, reviewing the latest reports on the summit. The kingdom's future was at stake, and her advisors had been pushing for her to agree to the terms set by the Drakros leaders. It was a difficult decision, one that could either bring peace or lead to war. Zyla's head throbbed with the weight of it all. Her father, King Zorath, had been growing more impatient with her hesitation. He wanted her to make a decision quickly, without overthinking. To him, this treaty was a way to secure their position in the galaxy, and he couldn't afford to let emotions cloud his judgment. Zyla, on the other hand, wanted to ensure that this peace would last. She wanted it to be more than just a temporary agreement. She wanted a future where trust between their people could grow, not just a treaty signed on paper. That night, as Zyla sat at her desk, she heard a knock on her door. She looked up, surprised. It was late, and the palace was quiet. She rose to answer it and was met by one of her trusted guards, who looked anxious. "Princess," the guard said, "there is something you must see." He handed her a small data pad. Zyla's fingers trembled as she took it, knowing that the contents of the pad could change everything. She activated it and began reading the report. As she read, her heart sank. The peace talks with Drakros were not what they seemed. A war faction within her own court had been secretly negotiating with the Drakros leaders behind her back. They had been planning to give away crucial parts of Zora's territory in exchange for promises of military support that would secure their own positions of power. Zyla's mind raced. How could this happen? How had she not seen it coming? There were traitors within her own court, people she had trusted. And even worse, they had been working with the Drakros, who were known for their ruthless tactics. The betrayal cut deeper than any wound she had ever experienced. She couldn't believe it. She had spent so much of her life believing that strength came from the people around her, her advisors, her allies. But now she saw how easily that trust could be shattered. In a fit of frustration, Zyla slammed the datapad down onto the desk. She could feel her pulse racing, her chest tightening with anger. She had been betrayed, not just by her people, but by the very ones she had trusted to guide her through this process. They had played her for a fool, using her desire for peace to their advantage. Just then, the door to her chamber opened once more, and Callan stepped inside, his brow furrowed as he saw the look of distress on Zyla's face. "Zyla, what's wrong?" Callan asked, his voice filled with concern. Zyla didn't say anything at first. She just looked at him, the weight of the betrayal still heavy on her shoulders. Her lips parted to speak, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, she motioned for him to come closer. Callan moved to her side, his gaze softening as he saw the pain in her eyes. He knelt beside her, placing a gentle hand on her arm. "Tell me what's going on. You're not alone in this." Zyla took a deep breath, fighting to control her emotions. She handed him the data pad, and Callan scanned the screen. As he read, his face grew more serious. This can't be happening," Callan murmured, shaking his head. "You've been deceived. Whoever's behind this, they want to use this treaty to gain power, not for peace." Zyla nodded, her heart heavy. "I don't know who to trust anymore. I thought I was making the right decision, but now I realize it was all a game. They've been playing me all along." Callan's hand tightened around hers. "You can't blame yourself for their actions. They chose their path. You still have the power to stop this, Zyla. Don't let their betrayal define you." Zyla looked at him, feeling a strange sense of clarity for the first time since discovering the betrayal. Callan's words were a lifeline, grounding her in the midst of the storm. She realized that he was right. She could still make things right, but it would take more than just strength. It would take trust, not in the people around her, but in herself. "I can't do this alone, Callan," she said softly, her voice filled with a new resolve. "I need you. I need your help to stop this, to make sure the peace we've been fighting for is real." Callan nodded without hesitation. "You don't have to do anything alone. I'm with you, Zyla, all the way." In that moment, Zyla understood something she had never fully grasped before. True leadership wasn't about making the hardest decisions. It was about standing by the right ones, even when the world around you seemed to crumble. And for the first time, Zyla allowed herself to lean on someone else. She had always believed that vulnerability was a weakness, but now she saw it for what it truly was: strength in its purest form. Together, they would confront the traitors within her court, and together, they would ensure that the peace they both wanted would not be taken away. But Zyla knew that the road ahead would not be easy. The betrayal was just the beginning, and as they set their plans in motion, Zyla felt a spark of hope that had long been extinguished in her heart. This time, the fight was for something real, something worth protecting, and she wasn't going to let it slip away. The following days were filled with a quiet intensity. Zyla knew that the betrayal of her court had left scars deeper than she could have imagined. The traitors, those who had schemed behind her back, had been exposed, and the damage they had caused was immense. But Zyla wasn't someone who ran from her challenges. She had faced the harshest realities of leadership and had always come out stronger on the other side. But this was different. This time, her heart was at risk. The palace was a place of tension now, with the traitors dealt with and the remainder of the court waiting for Zyla's next move. Her father, King Zorath, had been furious when he learned of the betrayal. He had demanded swift punishment, but Zyla had decided to take a different path. She chose to lead with wisdom, not with rage. This was her kingdom, her people, and she would be the one to decide their fate. The peace treaty with Drakros was still on the table, but Zyla could no longer sign it without more assurances. She could not allow her kingdom to fall into the hands of those who sought power through deceit. But there was another side to the treaty, something she had been too focused to see before. Drakros had been just as affected by the war as Zora. Their people had suffered, their resources had dwindled, and despite the political games being played, there was still a chance for true peace. She had come to a decision, but now she needed to face her final challenge. The decision would shape the future of her people, and it would determine what kind of ruler Zyla would become. It was a choice between duty and love. Late one evening, as Zyla stood by her balcony overlooking the quiet palace gardens, Callan entered the room. His presence was a comfort, something she had come to rely on over the past few weeks. He didn't speak immediately, but walked over to stand beside her, his gaze following hers as they both looked out at the peaceful scene before them. For a long moment, neither of them said anything. The weight of the moment hung in the air. But Zyla didn't mind the silence. She had learned to appreciate it, especially when it meant she could think clearly. "I've made my decision," she said quietly, breaking the silence. Her voice was steady, though there was a hint of uncertainty that she couldn't hide. Callan turned to face her, his brown eyes warm and full of concern. "What decision?" Zyla took a deep breath, her heart racing as she spoke the words she had been dreading. "I'm going to sign the peace treaty with Drakros." Callan's eyes widened in surprise. "But after everything that happened, you're still willing to go through with it? After the betrayal from your own court?" Zyla nodded. "Yes. I've thought long and hard about it. I can't let the actions of a few individuals determine the fate of my people. I won't let them destroy the hope of peace for all of us. I will not allow my kingdom to fall into more bloodshed." She turned her gaze back to the gardens, watching as the moonlight reflected off the still water. But it's more than that. I've come to realize something. This treaty, it's not just about power or control. It's about healing. It's about giving both Zora and Drakros the chance to rebuild. They've suffered, just like we have. Peace isn't just about ending the fighting. It's about offering a future, a chance for both sides to trust each other, to work together, and to heal from all the pain we've caused. Callan stepped closer, his voice low and steady. And you think they'll truly change? That they'll keep their word? Zyla turned to him, meeting his gaze. I can't say for certain. There are always risks. But sometimes, the biggest risk is not taking the chance at all. If we don't take this step toward peace, then all the lives lost will have been for nothing. And I can't live with that. Callan nodded, his expression softening. I understand, Zyla. You're making the right choice. It's not just about protecting your people. It's about giving them a future. Zyla smiled, though it was tinged with sadness. I've spent my whole life focusing on power and strength, but I've learned that true strength isn't just about being unyielding. It's about knowing when to let go, when to trust others, and when to take the leap, even when you're not sure what will happen next. Callan reached out, gently taking her hand. And you've taught me that, Zyla. You've shown me what real strength is. I'm proud of you. Zyla's heart swelled at his words, and for the first time in a long time, she felt truly at peace. She had spent so much time doubting herself, questioning her choices, and hiding behind the mask of duty. But now, with Callan by her side, she knew that she wasn't alone. She could trust herself, and she could trust him. I don't know what the future holds, Zyla said, her voice soft, but full of determination. But I know that this is the right choice. It's time for change for both our peoples. Callan smiled, his eyes filled with warmth and admiration. I'll be with you every step of the way, Zyla. Whatever happens, we'll face it together. With those words, Zyla knew that she had made the right choice. She wasn't just signing a peace treaty. She was choosing to build a future, to create a world where trust and understanding could flourish. And with Callan by her side, she felt more certain than ever that they could succeed. The next morning, Zyla stood before her people, ready to sign the peace treaty with Drakros. Her heart was heavy with the weight of the decision, but she was no longer afraid. She had found her strength not in her position as a ruler, but in her heart, her ability to trust, to love, and to choose peace. As the treaty was signed, Zyla's gaze met Callan's across the room. He gave her a small, reassuring smile, and, in that moment, Zyla knew that they had done something extraordinary. Together, they had brought a new beginning to their people. And for the first time, Zyla felt that she was no longer just the princess. She was someone who had chosen love and peace over power and fear. And that, she knew, was the greatest strength of all.